morning, everybody. Very nice to see everybody on this Nectar morning. Nectar is an Oolong cliff tea. It's a continuation of the last 6 weeks of focusing on Oolong teas. We just finished a series of fabulous in the mountain teas. Genesis, Phantasmagorica, and Chimerical, not in that order, Chimerical, Genesis, and Phantasmagoria. And we're getting context, we're building context. 5 weeks ago, this is way too long. This was pre-whatever. We started out with Golden Buddha. And even before that, we started in Southern Fujian, Golden Osmanthus. So we've been on this long journey. And by the way, I didn't forget the enlightenment that occurred in between. And today, we've arrived at Nectar. Nectar is different than all of the 6 preceding. And so you'll get a chance to taste that today. You'll get a chance because you've all taken great notes and because you're all such outstanding tasters, you'll get a chance to start to color in the picture of cliff teas in terms of where you can go with cliff tea. We're excited about today's tea. So there's a lot of things to continue talking about, a lot of things. And I've delayed talking much about the processing because in previous sessions we've talked about processing a lot. I've decided yet again today to not really talk about process, but instead talk about history. Because history is alive. We tend to think of history as static, right? Well, in X years, the Romans marched here, they captured this, and they became leaders in this area of the world. We think of it in those terms instead of, as I was always taught to think of it when I was in graduate school, it's alive because we continue to discover details. And details do matter because, oh, some general didn't follow instructions, boink, a whole province fell. It's stuff like that. So when we talk about the history of tea, and then more importantly, drill down on the history of Wuyi tea, there's history here. So let's go ahead and start on our historic journey. And actually, before we do, let's talk a little bit about tea culture, because this came up in discussion in the tea shop this week. And I realized I always like to start off with interesting things that have occurred at the tea shop. And while Rob's attempt to create Scarlet Robe ice cream is still on, it's still ascending, so to speak, and he's gotten a few steps closer, we don't have it yet. So that's the update about that. However, when we talk about tea culture, there's something that came up this week in a couple different contexts. And during a group discussion yesterday, somebody said something very funny. It might have been Rob or it might have been Anthony who said, yeah, when we come to Sophie's, we expect as part of tea culture to speak to everybody. But when you go to that other place, I can't even remember what that other place is called, somewhere in Mordor. When you go to those places, everybody goes with the expectation, don't speak to me. I'm separate. I'm doing my own thing. So tea culture in China is very, very much about connecting. You're drinking tea to connect. And whether you're connecting with a friend or a stranger, it's all about the connection. Whether you're drinking with a colleague or somebody you're about to do business with, it's this connection. Now, further on this path, we had an somebody from India walk in, and this is an old friend, walk into the shop, and this is a lady, and she and the boss have been friends for a long time. Actually, she's a friend of the tea shop. And she noted that, gosh, Biju, you look really good. Your skin is really clear. Why is this? And why is it that you just look so good? And so, in reflecting, and there was this dialogue that they had because this lady said, hey, I drink tea every day. Well, what kind of tea? Tea from India. Okay. And what are the components of that tea? Well, when I make it, the components are milk, little sugar, and spices. And so let's think about that because she then made a further comment, which all of a sudden highlighted something to us. And the comment was, oh, the rich people in India buy the Chinese tea. It's much more expensive, but they buy it because they like that original taste. So original taste is very important, but from a sense of health, if you're consuming something that has a lot of spices and sugar and milk, if you're living a non-optimal calorie life, gosh, I used a complicated phrase for you're hungry, you want something that fills you up. And so this type of tea fills you up. Now, if you are already living an optimal caloric life, then this tea overfills you and you feel overfilled and you look overfilled. This is not the characteristic of Chinese tea. People who are drinking tea on a regular basis, many times a day, typically look a certain way. And that look is not an accident. Drinking Chinese tea unadulterated makes you hungry. And at some point, you feel like, God, I got to get something in that system because the chemical components within the tea, the naturally occurring polyphenols, catechins, theoflavins, theorubicins, all those things, they stimulate the metabolism. And if you have control of your own brain and your thoughts related to eating, stimulating the metabolism is okay. I got to eat the optimal amount and I'll look the optimal way. And so this is also part of tea culture and Chinese tea culture. And remembering that the origin of tea culture is China. We now get a feel for when Tea Master says, gosh, you're not living a tea culture life. This is what she's referring to. Because in China, when people who are in tradition with the tea culture, they're drinking tea all day. And again, they're drinking it as a tool to kind of link up with each other, to be social, to pass the time. And so these discussions came up this week, and I wanted to share this with you. Now we'll go to history. I knew that there was something I was supposed to do first. History. Well, since I used the word history, let's start out once upon a time, a long time ago. And I know I'm safe. I'm safe so far. So let's talk about the movement of tea historically in China. Without question, very few scholars in China dispute the fact that tea arose in Southwest China. So we're really talking about Yunnan province. And the start of tea culture was really about tea trees. And over time, that shifted. It went from southwest and started to migrate to southeast. And then more northerly, but always in the eastern direction. So the Wuyi Mountains, at what point do we get a feeling that they have tea? And actually, do scholars have some proof that there's tea growing there? They already know by the southern dynasties. So we're talking about 479 to 502, that there's tea in the Wuyi Mountains. Oh, and what kind of tea is there in the Wuyi Mountains? There's good tea, because there's commentary about tea actually being thought of as tribute to the emperor. Remembering that geographical descriptors changed over time. So at that time, Wuyi Mountains was part of a larger geographical descriptor called Jinyang. And really, it didn't take on the traditional name of Chung'an until the Tang Dynasty. But there's no question that the stuff that was written, or the articles or the judgments that were written about this, were from the Wuyi Mountains, or was a description of tea from the Wuyi Mountains. They called it Bi Shui, which means green water. And that's a horrible translation. It's a simplified translation, because B is actually a specific shade of green. But let's not get into the wheat. Remember, I did this as a graduate student for years and years. That's why I know the weeds exist. But you just want the general picture. Now I'm giving you the general picture. So the green water, the tea from that area where this particular river ran through, was fragrant, sweet, and unique, was what was written. And it had a particle at the end. This was classical Chinese, a particle at the end, which was an honorific. And tea from the Wuyi Mountains took on this name, Ma Gan Ho. So sweet, aromatic, great tasting tea, and then an honorific. And so that's how the Wuyi Mountains actually became known. Now, historically, what happened was the emperors, and I use the term emperor in a loose way, don't I? Because it's a series of emperors, isn't it? And it's a series of dynasties. So what I really should say is, through the dynasties, tribute was paid to the various emperors. And this was tea tribute. And so various areas had imperial troops establish, in quotes, tea gardens. So the Wuyi Mountains belong to the northern tea garden, Beiyuan. But it wasn't separated from that. And this is important because later it actually has its own status. And not that much later, 200 or 300 years later, because by that time, everybody realizes, oh, Northern Garden? Where in the Northern Garden? I want that mountain. Magan Ho. I want that tea. Yes.
Peter asked, do you have the Chinese characters for that quote unquote green water?
I can get them. Green, I can't bring that to mind. But water is the water character, Shui. So that's easy. The B is it's three horizontal lines, a vertical through it, then a sun, and then a bunch of stuff underneath.
Very extremely helpful. Okay. You guys can work it out how to email later.
Here, the next time you're in, I'll have that character and I'll write it out for you. But it's not a frequently used character. Sorry about that. I'm not helpful at all. Not even helpful in my brain. At any rate, so by the Tang Dynasty, the emperor is saying, essentially, bring me the Wuyi Mountain stuff. Yes, I know it's the Northern Gardens. Bring me the Wuyi Mountains within, because the Northern Gardens was a much bigger area, and it included tea grown outside of the Wuyi Mountains. But everybody's getting the Wuyi Mountains. Wow, that tea is really fabulous. Now, I remind you, because we can never lose track of the fact that it was green tea that was being produced. The green tea methodology. If you're thinking, oh yeah, wow, Cliff tea. Yeah, it was Cliff tea, but it wasn't Wulong Cliff tea. It was green tea from this wonderful place. It had a minerality characteristic to it. And this is going to be important because as we move through history, we're going to find ourselves in the Southern Soon. We're not there yet. And the Southern Soon, gosh, you're going to ask me a date. Let me make up a date, 960 to 1127. That feels like approximately that's the Northern Soon. And that's where we're really going to find ourselves. So, but we're not there yet. We're still in the Tang Dynasty. In the Tang Dynasty, I know somebody's going to ask me that too. It's 618 or so up to 960 or so. So we're in the Tang Dynasty. Tea is coming into its own. Actually, tea's been around for quite a bit. It's been around for at least at that time over 1,000 years. But now, because society is more peaceful, the dynasties are longer and more stable. The arrangement of peasants is also more stable. So food supply is in good order. Order in the empire, it's safe. You don't have all these invaders wandering into China. They're contained at the Great Wall or even before that. And you actually have a powerful empire in the Tang Dynasty. The other thing that was really, really interesting about the Tang Dynasty is you have a multi-ethnic empire, especially at the leadership level. At the leadership level, yeah, you have the majority population, Han represented, but you also have Koreans, you have Turkic peoples, you have other peoples from Central Asia, all in key posts, and everybody getting along. The real rule at that time was speak the court language, and if you have ability, you're in. So at that time, tea became fun. So you had contests. You had people from different classes, from Buddhists, Taoists, from low-level local leaders, merchants, even beggars, all sitting together at the same table and drinking tea and having contests over tea and doing all sorts of things in relationship to experimenting with tea. So what sorts of experiments were they doing? Well, they were putting flowers in tea, they were putting fruit rinds in tea, they were doing all sorts of things. So long ago, they were doing these experiments and having contests. That stuff started to go away as you get into the Northern Sung Dynasty, 960 to 1127 or so. Why did it go away? It went away because the methodology of how to make tea changed. So instead of steaming, So pre-Northern Soon, mostly during the time, steaming the leaves to stop oxidation. Pick, wither slightly, not very much, steam, stop oxidation, and then create tea cakes. Basically, was what was going on. I've left out a few steps. You know, you got to bake these tea cakes. You got to compress them. You have to do all that stuff. But you get the picture, right? So, prize tea from the Wuyi Mountains, recognized highly. We go to the Northern Soon, and instead of steaming, we start frying. And frying is a palate difference because instead of that grassy, very green that you get from steaming, you get something with a little roast to it. You get something with that type of body. Is one better than the other? No. These are palate differences. I like this more than I like that. But that's a custom. That's not a rule. So at any rate, it went in that direction. Emperor's still looking for stuff from the Wuyi Mountains. So what key thing happened during the Northern Soon? And so I knew all of you knew that I was taking a stop in the Northern Soon for a good reason. And here's the good reason. So the tea literati created two different types of cakes. One was called dragon cake. And why is the other one's name escaping me? Phoenix. Dragon and Phoenix cakes. And what these were fancy ways of putting together the tea. Now, and there were a few extra steps and so forth. Let's concentrate on a few extra steps and so forth. Because a few extra steps and so forth meant that the farmers had more pressure. They had to do more things to get the tea ready to go to court, to get the tea ready for these specialized cakes. Why is this important? So I ask you this. Say in the late 1500s, I know I seem to be jumping around. I'm not. Stick with me. Late 1500s, as a farmer, you wake up one morning and you say, this green tea stuff is pretty good. But you know what? I think I can do better. I think I can oxidize, I can roast, I can roll, I can do all these things. I'm really creative. I can invent Wulong cliff tea. So I ask you this again. Did a farmer do that? Or is this an evolution driven by attention to detail and attention to various complicated steps to make tea? This is simply an evolution. Why didn't Wulong cliff tea arise elsewhere? Why didn't it arise elsewhere? Because they didn't have the same complicated steps of handling their green tea. So already farmers by tradition had a different set of steps than your farmers in Anhui. And Anhui, pick, roast, shape a little bit, bake so they can travel. Oh, I'm done. All 24 hours. These farmers in the Wuyi Mountains, because they're part of this imperial property, tribute, they're required to do so many more things. Still green tea, but they're doing more things in terms of making fancy cakes. So they already had in their heads more complication to doing tea. So this is, I think, how you can draw the line from where they were to getting to the Wuyi Cliff Tees. There is a line. And somewhere in there, there's the sense of oxidation. Now, where did that come from again? Remembering that sometime, probably in the late 1400s, early 1500s, in temples, Buddhist temples in Anhui province, some sort of accident occurred and a sense of oxidation and flavor change of tea leaves was discovered, but not popularized and not formalized. However, monks traveled between temples. And remember, let's think about the atmosphere in Anhui versus the atmosphere in the Wuyi Mountains. In Anhui, yeah, there's many beautiful places. You have the Yellow Mountains and so forth, but you don't have a mixing of the spiritual traditions. One mountain, Buddhist, one mountain, Taoist, temples near the city, Confucianist, they don't meet. They're not friendly. At times, they're warlike with each other because, hey, I have the real faith. I know how the world should be organized. I have the explanations. What were the Wuyi Mountains like again? Hey, all three traditions lived in harmony on the same set of mountains. Juxi, a very famous Confucian scholar, traveled to the Wuyi Mountains and established a temple there and was able to communicate with all the other traditions. So you had cooperation. All right. Now, let's add one more piece because, today, if you want to become famous, you got to have a TikTok, you got to have an Instagram, all that stuff, right? What was the equivalent in China in the Sung Dynasty? What's the equivalent to that? It's the poets. The famous poets are writing sometimes funny poetry, historical related poetry, satirical poetry, story poetry. And during the Sung Dynasty, all these poets were writing about the Wuyi Mountains, saying, oh my God, there's something great coming out of the Wuyi Mountains. Okay, so all the pieces are in place, right? You have this famous place whereby all the spiritual traditions could live together. You have information traveling back and forth by or via the spiritual traditions, that there are changes occurring in the tea arena. You have a storied history of making more complicated tea cakes in this region. And you have your TikToks, the Sung Dynasty TikToks, the poets writing about you. What's the last piece that needs to be in place? The last piece that needs to be in place is you got to have tourists. You got to have people coming. Well, when the Northern Sung Dynasty became the Southern Sung Dynasty and moved its capital south. Remember, let's think about dynasties for a minute. You got the capital, and the capital is just like New York City. Everybody goes there. And the best performances there, best teas there. New York City, Broadway. Well, you get the capitals in China. That's where the best performances are. The poets are living there. It's really vibrant. And if you want to travel to a vibrant place, this is how you're thinking. So when the capital moved to the south, not so far away from the Wuyi Mountains. Wuyi Mountains became a travel destination. Oh, yeah, these poets are writing about this place, famous. They're writing, by the way, just so that you're clear about details of vegetal clusters. Remember, we used this unglamorous term, vegetal clusters. Who the hell wants an asparagus cluster? Oh, I'm making asparagus tea. No, not those type of clusters. These clusters that I'm referring to are specific tree varietals. This is Camellia sinensis tree varietals in the Wuyi Mountains. Back in the Tang Dynasty, in the Sung Dynasty, you have poets writing about specific trees or sets of trees and the great tea that comes from them. And by the way, it carries forth in the literature. This is the wonderful thing about history, because when you get gross history, you get the dates. Oh, this dynasty is this date, ends this date. In between, you had some wars, weakened, and you had a new dynasty. But then when you go to the arts and crafts and look at the paintings and read the poetry and read the stories, and then you look at the individual journals, so many of these are still preserved and not fully read. You all of a sudden start to fill in the details, and it becomes richer and richer and richer. And the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 960, probably in the whole world at that time was the place to be. Really the place to be. Science, literature, tea. Was there any coffee at that time? No, I don't think there was any coffee at that time. It was tea. All right, so we're moving forward. How fast are we moving forward? We're moving forward much faster now because we're realizing that you're very thirsty. So we get to the Wuyi cliff tea invention of Wulong teas. So I've given you all the elements why farmers were and temple people were willing to experiment. And this is the environment. This is the foundation of how Wuyi cliff tea was invented. And most of the time, people don't tell you this story. So I am so happy this morning to bring forth a non-storyteller, a no-nonsense tea master, who nonetheless is numinous, to brew for you nectar as a demonstration and then brew with you. Bijou.
Thank you. Thank you. We do Yancha from Wuyi Mountain in Fujian. So yeah, everybody know my style, right? So yeah, this is old style. Okay. I do.
Yeah, okay. So she's got her usual tableau. This is the pot we're going to use today. This is an Yixing pot. This is a fancy old pot. Not very usable. It actually leaks, but it's pretty. And so we have it on display here. 2 glasses. We're going to make 2 cups, or this is set up so that we can make 2 cups. Yeah. So using a Kung Fu style, and Kung Fu really refers to mastery, craft mastery. Doesn't refer in this context to fighting. It doesn't refer to anything more than mastery. So using that style as it relates to small cup tea, we've expanded that and used the same principles for large cup tea. Heating the pot both inside and outside, 200-degree water. Also making sure that the cups are clean, heated, using 200-degree water. We are setting our timer for 2 minutes and 20, whoops, really set for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Because we're using a niche pot.
It's called 茶海.
Yeah, so
the
literal Chinese for that type of vessel is a chahai, which has the silly translation as a TC. And it's kind of silly to translate it like that, and yet that's the literal characters, T and ocean. But that's what that thing is called. Nega Bieda is your chapan?
Chazen.
Oh, chajan, yeah. And what she uses to put that in is a tea needle. That's what that's called in Chinese. Chajan. All right, so the leaves are in the pot. And you notice she's got a rhythm to her. And all of you have, I'm sure, developed a rhythm of how you make tea. And the rhythm of how you make tea ultimately determines what you're going to get as an end product. There's really a relationship between your rhythm and the end product. 200-degree water in the tea kettle with a spout so that she can control the pour, which she does. Fills the pot, covers, and pours hot water over, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. All right. I rushed the last part of that history through, but you get the principle that there was this interregnum. So between 1368 and around end of the 1500s, the Chinese farmers were supposed to only be producing loose leaf tea. No more cakes. But when you say something and you pass an edict, does that mean that all the knowledge that you previously accumulated disappears? I mean, here in the US, we passed prohibition. Does that mean that everybody who knew how to make alcohol all of a sudden gets that wiped, a mind wiped, and you don't know how to make alcohol anymore? And you don't know how to experiment with that? The answer is, of course not. And so, actually, I think that this prohibition, especially at the beginning, was very effective in simplifying peasant life. But you did have tea masters who'd already, and these are master producers, who'd already internalized complexity and flavor, especially of the Wuyi teas. Because while Wuyi cliff tea, Wulong cliff tea modality, very specialized, hugely unique, hugely difficult, it didn't come from nowhere. It grew out of a tradition of paying attention to details. And it grew out of a tradition of peacefulness, of coexistence. Because who the heck cares about details when the only detail that matters, well, am I feed myself today, and am I going to stay alive today? But once you have, hey, that's a nice piece of art. Oh, look at that bush over there. Once you have that, then man's creativity has an opportunity to blossom, which is exactly what happened in the Wuyi Mountains. This is a really, really interesting historical story. The timer went off, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Notice the tea master, not in a hurry, deliberate, pouring the tea. All right. Beautiful color, beautiful aroma. This is a 200-degree pour or steep. And as such, we have to use inhalation method, careful because this is very hot in order to enter the quality arena. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to enter the quality arena. And we're not in a hurry. We want first to get a sense of the mouthfeel. After the mouthfeel, we want to know, where's it dry? After, where's it dry? What kind of aftertaste, if any, am I getting? You want to know these things because they're all different for each of the teas. We have notes from the last few weeks. And then we want to pay attention to energetics. Energetics are really, really important, but they're really individualized also because we're genomically different. So we're going to react differently. But there are clear energetics with these teas. I'm entering the quality arena, by the way. You know, we should have a drum roll so that everybody knows that that's what I'm doing. Okay, so I entered. I have dryness, very distinct dryness right away. Aftertaste, I'm still a little unclear about. Energetics, I'm waiting. Round two. As I do round two, I'm going to verify round one. I'm also going to pay attention to aroma and beginnings of taste. Remember, these teas are very hot. And so as you taste down into them, as they cool, the taste, you'll be able to detect different things. Okay, I verified mouthfeel. I now have aftertaste, and I'm feeling a little energetics too. All right, so it's your turn to brew. Tea Master will brew along with you. Remember, you're going to set your timers for, depending on your vessel, whatever you're using. Since we're using Yixing, it's 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Using ceramic, it is not that. All of those are in your instructions. Making sure that everything is clean, hot. Wulong tea loves the heat, and that has to do with the processing modality. You know, that's the other thing, thinking about it, that when you have a very complicated tradition, perhaps you're more willing to experiment with things that ordinarily you might not experiment. So even things like temperature, which in the green tea regions, they didn't experiment with that. The temperature was the temperature. But here, they experiment with temperature. And that was from a brewing perspective. It's really, really interesting how these all arose because it isn't like the farmers had a template. You know, the emperor didn't send down a set of instructions, do this, do that, and do the other, and you'll be good. And at that time, the tea literati, as good as they were really focused on competition and brewing, not so much the modality of making, because it seemed pretty straightforward. Yes.
Can you remind us of the instructions for brewing in ceramic? The minutes are missing for the first brew. I'm thinking in the email, perhaps the minutes for the timing for ceramic first brew.
Okay, I'll have to look that up.
All right. Thanks for asking, Jen.
Ceramic, what size?
Nigga, who won? Okay, I'm getting there. Thank you for being patient. Let's see. That wasn't helpful. There we go. Yeah. I think it's 3 minutes. Yeah, it's 3 minutes. I am getting off the site so I can verify it very slowly. My fingers are very large. And this thing was, there we go. Now I'm there. Okay. Mhm. Oh, how ironic. Okay. Let's see.
它是 2 minutes 20 seconds.
Can you go to your email and find it because yeah.
So
Wait,
I,
what do you
no,
think?
no, I think it didn't. So 3 minutes.
3 minutes?
3 minutes finish.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
3 minutes.
3 minutes
Yeah,
for
I use
the
it.
ceramic.
Usually I
Okay.
have ceramic.
All right.
3 minutes.
Did we
I,
say?
I think
Oh, you did?
almost.
Okay.
Yes.
And we're almost done.
Yeah, it's
And-
3 minutes.
Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you. Peter comments that wakening of the leaves in the pot before adding water, he understands the name of his tea right away.
Okay.
Nice.
Great comment. So Peter notes that we do an okay job naming the teas because he's able to detect right away why we called it nectar from the aroma. And that is a great comment. And that did influence us right away in terms of naming because it was so sweet and just a lovely, lovely bouquet. So go ahead and enter the quality arena. Think about the things that we usually talk about. Get out your notes from the previous weeks and start to think about this in relationship to the other teas that we've had. This is different. This is distinctly different from the other teas. Take your time because this isn't something that's rushed. And especially the cliff teas. This is really thinking about the work that goes into these. It's a labor of love at this level. And so what's happening, by the way, which is a change, just so that you're aware, is they're trying to simplify some of the processes. So obviously not deep in the mountain. They're not trying to do that very much. They have simplified a few processes, but in general, they try and keep to the full tradition, which takes a long time. You have to be skilled. You can't just wake up one morning and say, oh, I'm going to do a cliff tea. Even if you're in the tea industry, especially if you're in the tea industry, you can't wake up one morning and say, oh, yeah, I feel like doing a cliff tea this morning. Not going to happen. Not a good cliff tea at any rate. So why are things changing? Things are changing because the pressure for getting these teas is so great in the consuming market in China, that you have an intensity of people with money who want these teas. And therefore, they're willing to pay for a handcrafted process. They're willing to pay for the old process. Nonetheless, you also have some farmers, although not the very traditional ones, but some who are making adjustments, and they are using machines that will make it simpler. They're cutting out details of processing. We generally don't get those teas, but this is the trend that you're seeing in China. And if a tea shop here has cliff teas, frequently what we've found is they're getting those that are using these processes which simplify, which eliminate, and make things in some ways more uniform, but not as unique and tasty. Yes.
Jeremy observes the dry leaves had a hint of honey-like sweetness, a hint of honey-like sweetness, I should say, but I don't find that in the broth. Rather, it remains in the aroma.
Okay, great comment. Jeremy makes this distinction between aroma and the tea water. So in the aroma, honey-like sweetness in the tea water itself, she doesn't get that same honey sweetness. And again, to go back to Peter's comment about why we named this, yeah, we detected a honey sweetness in this right away, just in the leaves themselves. And some of the other cliff teas, when you smell them, they don't have anything like this in their aroma.
For Rob, the aroma has a more buttery caramel hint, burnt sugar, and plum.
Okay, so Rob is detecting in the tea water, I believe the tea water, right?
The aroma.
Tea aroma, okay. Butteriness, almost a hint of caramel, and a hint of plumminess. And so, again, we're not leaving a nectar feeling, right? Because when you think of, in quotes, the nectar of the gods, the imagination is of sweetness. The imagination is of almost a honeyness, a caramel, a buttery, yeah.
Peter says some teas that are so dominant with floral nectar sweet up front can remain that way, but this gently but very efficiently makes room then for other qualities.
What a well put comment. So Peter's comment, he draws between the obvious clothing of the tea and the real substance of the tea. So he says, in essence, this tea has a sweetness, nectar, and honey-like nature to it in the aroma. But when you get down to the business of drinking the tea, and he puts it cleverly. It says the flavor makes room for other qualities of the tea. I love this description because much like last week when you were talking about phantasmagoria and how the roast was interwoven with the flavor, you again are parsing this out and realizing, yeah, that all these other qualities interwoven with some other things going on in this tea. Yes.
And Peter's comment, just as and you can elaborate, Peter, but was more just generally, it makes room, might not be just in the flavor, but could be in the aroma, yada, yada. So maybe you can let us know if you're thinking more broadly, Peter. And let me go to Robbie's comment. Robbie says, I get Peter's comment on my palate. There's a very wet feel that then becomes drier, stringent, perhaps. And the nectariness remains consistent.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so for Robbie, like this comment, the flavor goes from wet, and in other words, I'm going to change the word a little bit because I think what's implied by that is a juiciness. And then, oh, wait a minute, there's the dryness, which means, oh, yeah, this is real tea. And there is a sweetness and a nectariness, which hangs on even as she's swallowing. Great comment.
Jennifer says, Jen, my grandkiddo said that the dried leaves smelled like mochi.
I love this. The Jen's grandkids said that the dried leaves smell like mochi. So let's think about mochi for a minute, because typically mochi implies a sweetness. It also implies a little fruitiness. And to Rob's point, it implies a little bit of butteriness as well. So kid uses kid language, adults use experienced cooking language, and they match. They match right on. Thank you for sharing that.
Jeannie says, I got some roasted chocolate in the dry leaves that shifted to more of a honey sweetness in the aroma of the liquor. This tea leaves a nice sweet aftertaste lingering in the mouth.
Great. Jeannie comments about a sweet aftertaste lingering in the mouth. In the early stages of the dry leaves, she detected chocolate, and then in the wet leaves, a nectar, a honeyness. So she's gone through the whole gamut, dry, wet, and then the tea liquor itself. Love the completeness. You gave the whole package, and I think that that package is very appropriate, and not it's not really different at all than what the rest of you are saying, because for example, Robbie talked about that lingering nectar feeling in the mouth, and so this is all a nice package.
And Peter, thanks for elaborating. He shares that he was talking mostly about flavor since he was a bit too thirsty to spend so much time on the aroma. So he talked about that.
Okay, that's great. And Peter's comment, I want to address this because this is a man after my own heart, because lack of self-control. You start down, it's so good, and you just drink fast. That's me. I start down in the beginning, very scientific, parse everything, and this is good. And then I drink fast.
Robbie gets the juiciness.
Yes. So Robbie gets juicy. Robbie, right?
Yes.
Yeah, gets the juiciness out of this. There absolutely is. And let's draw that back to the mochi comment. Let's draw it back to Rob's plumminess, because typically, if you're getting a fruit slash butter slash sweetness, there tends to then in your mouth almost be a salivation, and linked with the tea liquor itself or the tea water itself, it becomes juicy, easy to drink.
And he shares, I feel like the minerality, while not too intense up front, lingers and slowly mellows at the end of the sip, which draws me back more faster than usual.
I like this comment. So Andy talks about something none of you have talked about yet, which is the minerality. He talks about it in a really interesting way because it's lingering, and yet it's not overwhelming. It is there, but it's in quotes, proper place. And what I mean by that is it doesn't take away from all these other flavors and consistencies. And so Andy is focused on that and says, yeah, this is a real Cliff tea because it's got that real minerality, but the minerality is cooperating and enhancing rather than dominating. Love the comment.
Rob says, perhaps the tea could be named Siren because I feel drawn into perilous depths.
So Rob wants to take the yellow tea name, Siren Song, borrow the siren to suggest the perilous depths to which this tea is taken. I really like this comment for other reasons. And I like it because it really addresses the fact, linked with Andy's comment, that the flavors are interacting with each other, but they're interacting in a way which is not bouncing off of one another. They're interacting as if, yeah, this was planned and we belong here together. Great comment.
Jeremy says, full mouth juiciness, abundant minerality, slowly warming my core on this cool morning. It's an energetic tea, a brainy tea.
I like this comment. So Jeremy addresses the energetics, and the energetics are something that I share exactly. A warming, a warmth, suffusing the body, and in her case, suffusing the brain, a brainy tea. Love that. She also addresses this question of minerality because she says, yeah, it's fully mineral, but it's not over dominant. And it combines with everything, including the energetics. So this is when you feel that warmth, when you feel the stimulation, and none of you mentioned minerality until later into the session here. This means that in some way the farmer really was successful in bringing out the minerality, but not allowing it to overdominate.
A couple more comments.
Okay.
Jen says, this may be sacrilege, but the tea liquor reminds me of chocolate-covered coffee beans.
So Jen has obviously had an opportunity to safely enter Mordor and safely come back. This is a rare quality. And so she addresses the flavor of this as being like chocolate covered coffee beans. The chocolate I absolutely get. And actually, I do get the coffee bean comparison because coffee beans have a roastiness to them. And there is a roastiness in this tea. So while I would normally not have said coffee beans, I get where this is going.
Peter says, I'm really enjoying the energetics, the diffuse and even warming nature, which I'm mostly experiencing from the core, especially in my front body. When I say diffuse, I feel it through every tissue, including the bones themselves. Very grounding and unexpectedly so given the sweetness.
Great comment, Peter. Talks about the energetics. This comment really focuses on that. Diffuse, grounding, as if every cell into the bones has been infused. And he talks about usually with the sweeter teas that he doesn't get this type of heavy energetics. And yet in this one, it's fully in the body, very grounded. Great comment. All right. This is a wonderful group to work with. You always cover all the bases, and today was no exception. Nectar. Next week, what are we going to do? We're going to do Golden Goddess. And so you're going to get yet another feeling from Golden Goddess. You're going to get something that you haven't described yet in the other cliff teas. So I'm looking very much to sharing that with you. This week, you have your usual responsibilities, which is to stay healthy, stay safe, because this upcoming week is Thanksgiving. And so if you're traveling places, that's insane in the sense of of trying to travel is hard. If you're trying to have guests, that's also hard. So remember to take a step for yourself, have some tea, get yourself in good, grounded order. Happy upcoming Thanksgiving. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.
Bye, folks.